the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast.
That's true.
Any of the fire content provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are of their opinion and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
Unless you're abusing people, then I have a problem maligning you.
Also, we're not doctors, psychologists, or wizards. We're just two non-experts trying to make you a friendly, informative podcast that helps you understand culty shit. Hey everybody, Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, aka Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
aka ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story, we met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So there's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM, still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Part 2 with Guinevere Turner.
If you missed Part 1,
Put it in reverse.
and see you next week. Enjoy.
I wanted to ask how all that informed your career and your career choices. And just from what I saw, like, you had a lot of time to be creative, and I'm wondering if you're going to glean some positive out of what you were doing. How did you turn it into that positive to have the career that you've had?
I don't know. It's kind of a chicken egg thing, really. Do you know what I mean? We were all given diaries and only some of us really took to them. And I found myself constantly trying to catch up, just sort of in education and cultural understanding once I was out of the family. I was so ahead in so many ways and so behind in other ways. So I think it also just made me such an avid consumer of culture, because I was trying to study so I could do how do people talk and what do people talk about, and like what's normal and what's normal amount of eye contact, what's normal clothes, what's normal music. And so I think that's almost where the actor comes from.
You're right.
And the writer. It's like study it, imitate it, go, be it.
Like you're sponging all the time.
Yeah, sponging and then regurgitating and then trying to form a person that is socially acceptable based on my findings.
Amazing.
You know what I mean? All of which is basically like writing scripts and being an actor.
Yes. Okay. How did you extract yourself from the second culty, Part 2 with FP?
I'm moving with my grandmother, but then he keeps stalking me. And finally, he shows up. My grandmother got a restraining order against him. He wasn't allowed to be in that house. And I was like, okay, it's done. Whew. He's never going to be here. I am safe. And then one day I'm just home with just my baby sister and brother dancing, singing, watching MTV, messing around. And I just turn around and he's just standing there in the doorway and it's just me and them home. And he's like, we're going. This is it. I'm enough of this bullshit. Everybody pack up. We're going right now. And I didn't realize this until a friend of mine, my friend Mary Herron, who I do many of my films with, she was like, I didn't expect it to turn into a thriller. Then I just needed to figure out how to get the fuck away from him. And what happened was I made up a bunch of lies, because that's a thing that you get good at, saying that I needed to go to this job that I had in the mall when I really didn't. And he's like, well, you're quitting that fucking job anyway, so who cares? And I'm like, what does this man care about? What does this man care about? Oh, money. But I have to pick up my paycheck. Lies, 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 on the spot, lies.
Smart.
Being around him is, a huge part of how I honed those skills. And so he dropped me off there and said he was going to come back right when my shift was over. And I ran into the stockroom and called my boyfriend at the time. And my boyfriend called me back like 20 minutes later and said, my dad said you can come live with us, which was like, I just was saying like, can you just come get me now? And like, so we can figure out what the fuck to do. But then his dad said, come live here. And so I had a place to go.
I'm so glad.
But it gets crazier because then my mom won't let me go to school because she has to sign a piece of paper because she wants me to come back so that everybody can be in an abusive household, not just her. And it's pretty relentless until it's not.
Okay, we won't go into the details, because I'm going to finish reading it as soon as this interview's over, or listening to it. And then also we want our listeners to obviously buy the book. Dear listeners, this is a very, very good book and super fascinating and so well written. So we won't reveal the end of the thriller aspects of it. I'm just glad that you're out. Okay, in the New York Post story, you reference the late 60s as a kind of golden age of cults that blossomed because people sought change and knowledge and spirituality and alternative ideas that made everyone kind of vulnerable to being manipulated. Where do you see us now as a culture? And is there something to be said about U.S. culture and individualism that feeds into cult dynamics like QAnon and New World Order? And what do you see happening right now, since you're such an observer of culture?
Like most forms of power that have been called out and identified, it's morphing. Cultiness is morphing in all these different ways. Like NXIVM obviously started as this kind of corporate thing, and there's something safe sounding about that. And I think that the internet, in the case of things like QAnon, which is obviously very culty, the internet just changed everything because cults can exist virtually. And so that you can isolate yourself. I grew up isolated, but I grew up surrounded by people. Now you can be isolated with a system of beliefs and be in your freaking basement and not ever actually have any kind of human interaction. And that, I think, creates a whole other level of madness and potential for violence and for things like, what happened on January 6th. But it should be noted that it feels like cults are really American. But I mean, one of the most famous cults was Shoko Asahara in Japan in the 90s, who, bombed a subway in Japan, the UK, Australia seems to be brimming with all kinds of cults,
Hotbed, yeah.
So I don't think that it's distinctly American. Is it distinctly Western? I don't know. Japan. Mm-hmm. Oh, and there's this whole documentary I haven't watched yet about a Korean cult.
And there's one in Kenya.
Oh, yeah, the one in Kenya where they're digging up all the bodies. Yeah, so they're everywhere. I mean, that's really why I talk about that people think of it as, something that was really happening back then. And then we're just generations of people dealing with it. I mean, less so now that all these documentaries have come out.
Well, America has the media there to scoop it up right away and make a story out of it and sometimes blur the message.
No, make a Lifetime movie out of it.
Exactly. Yeah. Did they make a NXIVM Lifetime movie?
Oh, my God.
Oh. Is it just like the most unbearable thing ever?
Oh, my God. I look forward to the commercials.
I used to do Lifetime and Hallmark movies as an actor. I may never work for Lifetime again because I've been very vocal about it. It is so awful. It is so disrespectful. It is so poorly written and so inaccurate. Like, they chose this very handsome guy to play Keith Raniere. Rude. And then also, like, Nancy is this very expressive, like, oh my gosh, she's so vibrant and like overexpressive and bizarre. The woman playing her was like, it's really important that you work on your goals.
Oh, because they were doing like, she's going to be culty instead of like the sort of chipper kind of vibe that she has. Yeah. That's just bad homework. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's such bad homework. It's such bad homework.
But more importantly, how do you feel about the actress who played you, Sarah?
I mean, she made me look fucking batshit crazy, to be totally honest. But that being said, at the time, I was pretty off I was not in a good place when I figured out that like Keith's initials were on my body. I was manic,
Your response was appropriate.
Yeah. And I haven't watched it since it came out. And when it came out, I was very much not in a good place. So maybe I'll watch it again and think differently. But either way, shame on them.
I'll never sit through it again.
What's crazy about that Lifetime movie is cut to 6 years later, I'm standing in the playground here in Atlanta. We've just moved. And it's our like the grade 3 play date in the fall. And I meet another mom and she's from LA and she's a writer. And I'm like, oh, cool. And I'm like, oh, what would you just write about? And she's like, oh, I just wrote a book about a cult. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, how'd you research that? And she's like, I watched a lot of docuseries. And I'm like, did you watch The Vow? And she's like, of course. I'm like, oh, hi, I'm Sarah. And she's like, oh, I thought you looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. My best friend played Allison Mack in the Lifetime movie. And I was like, oh,
Wow.
Allison Mack was like at my wedding. And she's like, that's just weird. Her name's Kat Petrovich. Her writing name is Kat St. John, and she writes fiction. And anyway, we just instantly connected because she knew the story and her friend played Allison Mack really well. That's the best thing about that movie is that the woman playing Allison Mack nailed it.
What are the odds that you're standing next to this
What are the
woman?
odds?
You know what I mean? When shit like that happens to me, I'm like, does this mean that there's an alternate reality, or does it mean just that I'm in the right place at the right time? I'm not really sure what it means, but I'm like, does this mean I'm magic? What does it mean?
Yes, I think it's magic. And then like, I just was like, okay, you're going to be my friend because like you get me and you know my story and it's just easier. And that was a question I have for you because you wrote somewhere, I think it was in your book or the article about how like when people ask you, where are you from? There's like, if you really say, where'd you grow up? That your answer is so long. How do you summarize it now? And like, what's your way of interacting in the world now?
I have a feeling it's about to change because now where I'm from is something you can buy and read about.
Right.
But generally speaking, in most contexts, I just say New York. I just say that I grew up in upstate New York because it's kind of like when someone says, how are you? Like they don't really want to know how you are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Most of the time when someone says, where are you from? They just want a simple answer. It's almost rhetorical.
Right. Well, we do. We want to know how you are.
I am good. I'm a little tense. The tricklings of how my generation, the generation of people that I grew up with, are responding to the book are coming to me.
Mm-hmm.
What are they saying?
There's the one that I made it all seem so idyllic and beautiful. And I'm like, did you stop reading the book after I'm not in the cult anymore?
Right.
More things happen. I'm not out. I'm realizing things. That's one of the main complaints that I've heard. And also because I know from a lot of them that they've said point blank to me, everything got so much worse after you left.
Wow.
Right.
It's because they all became teenagers. They all experienced just a lot of violence and conflict and drinking and craziness that I didn't see. On the one hand, they're saying you're making it seem so idyllic. On the other hand, they're saying, oh yeah, you missed the hard part.
What got worse?
It just got very violent. I think a lot because everybody kind of became teenagers and actually had agency and wanted things and that,
Right.
you know, and the older generation wasn't ready for that. And everybody needed to figure out like, we can't all marry each other. You know, like we maybe don't want to live this way. And, you know, you have to let us find our own way in the world. And I think that, you know, everybody just had to figure out what that looked like because it involved disobedience. We'd been raised really like leaving is the unforgivable traitorous crime. But like, it's not really fair to expect a bunch of teenagers to just continue on this way in a whole new set of decades. And also just you should be allowed to be your own person. So many of us were related in or grew up as siblings. So it also just seemed incredibly unlikely that any of us would ever get together with each other, and very few did.
There's another thing to tick off the list of culty behaviors is like keeping people dependent through fear. And almost every group now has this thing where like, if you leave, then...
Well, you can't leave. Subtext.
You can't. Otherwise, bad things happen to you, whether it's you live on the street, work at McDonald's, have cancer, never work through your issues, be labeled a traitor, whatever the fuck is.
I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
So cult documentaries come under the sort of broader roof of true crime documentaries. And people are like, I'm obsessed with cults. I'm putting that in air quotes. I'm obsessed with true crime. I'm obsessed with cults. As if, you know, we're a knick-knack store.
Yeah.
A cult is not a crime. Cults come under the true crime thing because there are documentaries made about the ones that committed crimes. My question for you is there such a thing as a cult that is okay? And of course, it would never call itself that. But what would that look like? Are all cults criminal? What makes it a cult? If it's functioning in this group way, and even if it's, you know, self-actualizing, even if it's isolated, if there is no abuse, is it a cult? / is there such a thing as no abuse in those kinds of situations? I know that's a lot, but this is something that I'm thinking about and wanting to write about because I feel like the cult documentaries, there's so many of them and it's kind of painful to watch it be entertainment. I know why I'm watching them.
Yes.
But I know mostly people, you know, it's not like The Inconvenient Truth where you watch a documentary about the environment and it makes you buy a Prius. That literally is what happened to me. You know, nobody's watching them and being like, okay, what are we going to do about cults? They're just like, whoa, those people are messed up. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to formulate something really intelligent and I'm basically just workshopping it with everyone who thinks about these things too.
Are you familiar with Stephen Hassan's work and the bite model and the spectrum?
Yeah.
My thesis now is like any group can become culty. And any group can be labeled a cult, but I almost don't even want to use the word cult anymore because it's so divisive and people separate themselves in a way like, oh, I would never do that.
It's marginalizing. The conversation is already comes with a lot of baggage if you're using the C word.
Exactly. We tend to look at like, what are the dynamics at play that are either healthy or not healthy on this, if you look at the spectrum. So like if you took your situation, which the idyllic part, like people living on a farm, living independently, trying to live by a certain set of morality, maybe separate from the outside world, that could be really lovely. Where does it become problematic? Is it healthy? Is it toxic? Like, never mind that, again, the C word. There's a couple questions like, can people leave without being shunned, excommunicated, or shit talked? If that can't happen, people can't come and go as they choose, that's a problem. That's not healthy for someone's autonomy and sense of self. Where does the sense of self come from? Does it come from themselves or from an outside doctrine or charismatic leader or person? Like, there's just certain questions that I'm trying to formulate to give people to ask themselves, because people write to us all the time, like, is this bad? And which is good, like that this conversation's happening. And I do think that's where the documentaries can move outside of entertainment and actually be a template for people. At least that was our experience with The Vow. People write to us all the time saying, I was a Jehovah's Witness, I was da-da-da-da, and I've left. I left because I could see it with your group. I couldn't see it in my group, but I could see it in your group. So I feel like just showing how it happens in different situations allows people to go like, is this right for me? Is this healthy for me? And do I want to continue being a part of it, knowing that I can't leave, or I'm isolated, or whatever. Like, there's so many different things that I try to present to people. Like, this is what makes it problematic, and specifically coercive control.
A thing that surprised me when I started engaging with the Lalage Center and a lot of other different, and at any given discussion group in the Lalage Center, it's Children of God, it's Scientology, it's Mormons, it's Orthodox Jews, it's, like offshoots of all of these religions that, and then it's family cults we've never heard of. And then it's everybody. I was surprised at how many people said, again, silver lining of COVID, that during COVID, they were finally isolated from their usual day-to-day busy work, intensity, group stuff, blah, blah, blah. That's partially what made them realize that maybe they were in a cult. And then watching Wild Wild Country.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so these documentaries are helping someone. That's not majority of who's engaging with them. But if they are making people kind of look at their own situation with new eyes, then I'm not as mad at that. But that surprised me. I realized that I assumed that someone who's coming from that kind of environment would be like I was, which is like, God, everyone's not a cult. Like, calm down. Do you know what I mean? Because you're not ready to hear what that is. And that means you have to examine yourself. And that's just not something you're ready for. That made me happier and less kind of mad about how much cults have become the best, most juiciest kind of true crime that people are just, can't wait to gobble up.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. #cold pools, #crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me, and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it, and I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family. But everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
I would add a caveat. I think a prerequisite for cults is there's an abuse of power somewhere. And what makes cults dangerous is that it's coercive.
Right.
They don't know that it's going on. So putting a language to the coercive aspects of it, because there's always plausible deniability. You can go to the subject and go, oh, you're here by your want. But the person who's administering the coercive control is the person abusing the power.
Right.
And they can maintain a front that they're not only not doing that they're the opposite, that they're actually empowering people when they're disempowering people. They're sucking your life force. And the people that they're doing it to are none the wiser. Sarah and I had a conversation recently. I addressed how I knew she viewed me. We were in a system that was designed to make you fail, work really hard and make you fail. It was hard to figure out the forces behind your failure when you were doing the tenets and practices that you knew to be backbones of success: discipline, follow through, all those things. And there are many people in the organization that were doing that and not yielding results in a certain way. It's because they were being subverted by the cult leader.
Mm.
And since we've been out, pretty much the projects that Sarah and I have gotten on without that subversive
Tug.
Yeah, coercive, like almost invisible force, we're starting to thrive in certain ways. In short, we're not living our lives with those shackles. It was devastating for me because I'm someone who prides myself on my results. You know, in a lot of ways, to my detriment, I measure my self-worth on my capacity to perform. It's just how I've been able to measure that. And there's probably work for me to look at there. That's fine. But like, I do recognize there's a correlation between my self-worth, my self-esteem, and my capacity to build what I want to build. And those things are happening in multiple areas in our lives right now. And it's taken 5-6 years, because it takes 5-6 years to do something, I think, worthwhile. And so there's so many variables and there's so many ways to look at how these coercive things manifest. And it's hard to put language to it. And I think what the current climate of cult recovery and all that stuff too is putting language to where there's a deficit of language to what these things looked like, sounded like, and all that stuff, which is one reason I decided to participate in the vow, because I have a lot of friends who know me. They're like, dude, you did not want to be there. And I was like, yeah, I didn't want my personal life to be other people's entertainment. That hurts. That just hurts. I didn't want to go through the slings and arrows, but then I recognized, you know what? I can be a formidable force in this, because how I was abused was different. I wasn't targeted sexually. I was targeted differently. My trauma is different, and you might say in some cases less, but it certainly targeted me where it hurt the most, which is I want to feel successful and powerful in my own life, protect my family. And I was in a lot of ways unable to do that. So that was a tough pill for me to swallow, and then go on a documentary that showcased that.
Yeah.
But so I found my lane, and I educated myself and found my language and tried to deliver what I felt like I could in my lane the best I could. So I could add a brick to that knowledge base so people could understand it. And hopefully, you know, that's what the podcast has done. And this lane has opened up. I believe if you have a lane to help the human team in some capacity, you take it. It's an opportunity for you to move the group of everything that we're doing forward. And the conversations are going to be messy if they're effective. And hopefully the emergent property is more understanding and more language to what abuses of power are going on, because I do believe most people are good, and it only takes a handful of psychopathic people to get together and start creating these systems that ultimately make us the victims of it and none the wiser. So I like that lane. I'll stay in it as long as the world will have me in it and listen. And your story certainly added more language to how I understand it.
Yeah. Writing it and talking about it, that's one thing. But talking about what necessarily happens is that people, like, as you were saying, happens to you, people reach out to me. That happened when I wrote the piece in the New Yorker in 2019. A wave of people who felt like they didn't have anyone to tell, or they felt ashamed, or they felt like isolated from their family, or they just, had, like me, had kind of erased their past because it was too weird for, trying to have a normal life. And so for me, I feel this immense responsibility to be educated, to be, have a counseling minded person, and to have a place to point people to for resources, because it's incredible how many people there are.
It's shocking.
And how unmoored they are and how they
Yep.
don't find each other and how they're just reaching out to me, like through my website, like finding all these different ways to find me because I spoke to something that they hadn't heard before about what it feels like to be in a cult and to not be in a cult. And so that's for me, my biggest job right now is to kind of be an advocate, but that starts with having smart things to say.
It's also case by case. That's the biggest thing you have to recognize. Like, your story's different than mine. And like, when I hear yours, I go, oh my God. And you hear mine, you go, oh, what? Yeah, that's the thing that hopefully ties us all together. Like, hey, we're all in this together. There's people that are abusive and putting language to it and hopefully educating.
I really tried in my film, Charlie Says, which is about the women who killed for Manson and largely takes place in jail, their time in prison. But they had an entire crazy experience in prison. One of the reasons I took that project on is because I wanted to really try, A, to humanize them, and B, to represent the baby steps of coercion that can make you stay and what love bombing looks like, so that they became human beings who got sucked into something before they realized it was bad, and how there's a point of no return where you've committed to something, and even if it starts to feel fucked up, you've come this far. So you either have to admit that you've been a fool this whole time, or you have to double down. And that's where it gets dangerous. And so that is a story that I want to continue to tell, which is ironic because that is not what happened to me. But I understand it, and I understand that people don't understand it. And with that misunderstanding comes judgment and a lack of empathy.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And that was actually one of my questions for you, which is, what are some of the inappropriate questions people feel entitled to ask you? Or as you put it, hashtag people who've never been in a cult say.
Just people say things like, oh, was it like all like acid and orgies and you know what I mean? Stuff like that, where I'm like, if it was, then maybe that wouldn't be like the easiest thing for me to talk about. People say, oh, you grew up in a cult? How was that? What? How was that? And to which I say, how was your childhood? I'll never be able to sum up that part of my life in like a sentence like, oh yeah, I had a great, I grew up in Akron. I had a great, my mom was a cancer nurse and my dad was a blah, blah, blah. Right. And, it was great. Like, sorry, can't really sum up my experience in that way. Like, or am I supposed to say, oh, it was fucked up, man? Like, what? Yeah. It's just always the weirdest question. Like, how was that? I'm like, I mean, it might be why I wrote a book. Here's how it was. Here's 360 pages about how it was.
I think that's a really great way to solve that problem. Say, why don't you read the book and then we go for coffee and talk about it.
It might actually be why I wrote the book, is that actually it's going to save me a lot of money with therapists, because I can say, instead of spending like 6 or 7 or 8 sessions explaining to you where I grew up and what my trauma is, I wrote a book about it. So if you could just read that, it'll save us both a lot of time and me a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, one of the biggest gifts was starting therapy when I first got out with Dan Shaw, who I mentioned earlier, was a narcissist expert. And he knew about NXIVM already, and he knew who Keith and Nancy were. So I could say things like, like I'm so pained that I've lost my relationship with Lauren, for example. And he knew who that was. And that was such a gift. And circling back to our earlier conversation with the lack of therapists, I think you'd make an excellent therapist. Until then, if you don't become a therapist.
I don't have time.
I don't have time either. But I've thought about it. But I think, and one of the things I always say to people, I have like a 6-part healing regimen that worked for me. And like, this is what worked for me. It might work for you. I'm never going to tell anyone what to do ever again. But one of the things is getting together with other ex-members, not just the group. So for us, like getting together with ex-NXIVM members and just like speaking freely and like shit talking, be like, wow, remember that time that so-and-so did that? Like, that was such a fucking awful, bitchy thing to do. You couldn't say anything like that in the cult. You couldn't speak poorly of anybody. That's how Keith protected himself. It was called speaking with dishonor. So like just being able to speak freely without being suppressed, without having all the rules. And then also, I didn't recognize until I started being public. And actually, that's where I met Yanya Lalich, was on cults and extreme beliefs for I think it was Hulu. And I met Yanya and all these members of other groups. And we were sharing our experience. It was so healing for me, more so than even the therapy that I was doing.
Yeah. When I first started going to those groups, I'm like, I have never felt so at home in a group of strangers. There's just stuff, vibes, experiences, feelings that we barely even have to articulate in a way that we would to other people. And like pretty much somebody's crying at all times, if not all of us, but also laughing. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, this is a safe space like I've never felt before. It's pretty incredible.
So good.
I'm on a journey of educating myself, but more, I am educated of finding the best way to connect with people. The other day, I thought to myself, again, trying to demystify how people get sucked in and that it can be anyone. I thought to myself, maybe this will work for people. Have you ever been so in love with someone or so crushed out on them that you made terrible decisions that didn't seem like you. We've all done that, right? Even if you got a little bit stocky, but it was in the name of romance, or you know what I mean? Like you went a little bit outside of yourself. You talked too much about the person to your friends until they told you to shut up. Like whatever it is, like the traces of it are there, like of falling in love and kind of losing yourself.
Yeah. Or like been in a situation where like, you know, you were around a group of people and they were doing something you didn't want to do and you did it anyway because you wanted to be part of the group.
Yeah.
A lot of those things are precursors. Nippy and I were just with some of the football people that Nippy does his podcast with, and there was a party afterwards, and Nippy and I we're not really like, we drink every now and then, but we're not like heavy drinkers. And they were doing sake out of a fucking super soaker and like squirting sake into it was like a frat party, like drink. And like,
these are adult humans.
These are adult humans in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And having a hibachi with super soaker sake. And Nippy's driving. I'm there. I have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old at the party. Not a place for these kids to be. And Nippy's like, I don't want it. And there was all like, oh, what are you, a baby? You know, and like they were teasing him. And then like they did it with Troy with like water, you know. And I said to Troy afterwards, I was like, it's super important that like what you saw tonight is, I want you to understand, like because there were other adults that didn't say that they don't want to do it and then they caved. And I was like, if you don't want to do something, like it's so important that you have that boundary and that you can say no. And even people aren't going to like you and people are going to tease you and make fun of you. Like, and we tried to talk to him about it. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, but people quietly are going to admire that you did that.
And also for you, it's like he got to see his dad not being one of those people.
Yes.
And I think this is probably really important for a kid to be like, you know, my dad doesn't have to do that. I don't have to do that. I don't have to be a person who gets basically bullied into shit.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just really love sake. So part of this thing that's upsetting to me about this story is that the sheer sort of brutishness of serving sake this way.
I know.
Beer, fine, like whatever. But like sake is like chilled, little glass, poured delicately for your dining partner, not just like super soaker that shit into your throat. That's crazy.
It's misappropriation of sake.
Oh yeah, and not only that, like it's totally unsanitary. Like I couldn't stop thinking about like how gross the whole thing was, and that's definitely not high quality sake if you're putting that much into a super soaker. That's like basically vinegar and distilled. I don't know what the fuck. And anyway, we digress. But like these kinds of things, I think are super important. We try to do that in our podcast, is like talk to people about parenting and like how to teach kids healthy boundaries and how they can say no to things. And those are the precursors to getting caught up in things. So much of like my saying yes to NXIVM and missing red flags is because I didn't want to rock the boat and wanted to be liked, and all my things that made me susceptible to and wanting to be special and being popular and being part of a club, and like those were what drove me. Like I was a total nerd growing up. I was a complete nerd, and then this was like everything I always wanted. So I missed all the red flags because I was like, this is amazing. I'm so great. I'm flying on a private jet to Alaska, you know, like great, right?
Yeah.
Understanding how the environment that I was raised in, which was wonderful and safe and amazing, but also I had my own challenges, but made me, you know what I mean? Like that I think is a key part of the conversation.
It just made me wish that there was like a thing, a standardized test. Someone could say like, I would never fall for that shit. Yeah. But that you could actually give someone a standardized test that says, you know, gives them a meter how susceptible you are to coercive control. Because I'm sure that is a number of all of us. Me personally, because of how I was raised, you would be hard pressed to suck me into anything that has doctrine of any kind.
Right.
But I'm the exception.
Because you've been through it.
Yeah.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're remembering to hydrate, stretch, and unclench your jaws. Sometimes listening to conversations about heavy topics can really make you tighten up, you know? And remember, a little bit culty loves you. Also, come hang out with us on Patreon after you finish this episode. It's fun over there. Fun is good. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or never miss yoga. Maybe it's getting 8 hours of sleep. I mean, that's my personal and everyone's dream, isn't it? Well, I definitely have some non-negotiables. Like I'm in Vancouver right now and I'm spending literally as much time as I can outside in nature. Hashtag cold pools, hashtag crushing it. Nature is a non-negotiable. Not enough time in the fresh air and the trees around me and I start to feel not great, not myself, not grounded. Therapy day is a bit like my nature walks. I try to not miss it. And I know I'm just going to feel so much better all around if I make it a priority. I get so much out of it. It helps me put my worries and anxieties in their rightful place and helps me clear my mind so I can focus on what I really need and sometimes what I don't need. Like, I don't need to be overbooking myself just because I hate to say no to people. You know what I mean? Thanks, therapy. Thanks for helping me see that. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try.
It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. And switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Look, even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/culty today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/culty.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
I can't even tell you how many times we talk about this all the time on the podcast. They tell me how they're not susceptible and they would never fall for it. And they're glad I got out, like, I'm so happy you got out, whatever. And then they tell me about something that they do that's like super culty, that they don't know is super culty. Like either they have a mantra from transcendental meditation, or they go to CrossFit religiously, or they,
spin class,
like not super problematic on the outset. Inside the core, inner circle, major problematic. All these things, like Nexium was great on the outside for a lot of people for a long time. Oh, which, to circle back to your earlier question, and Nippy talked about abuses of power, is just the concept of the bait and switch. Like you think you're signing up for one thing, but it's actually this other thing. So there's a lie. Mm-hmm. You're signing up for communal living and an idealistic off-grid whatever, but it's actually a hotbed for teenage brides and sexual abuse.
Yeah.
You don't sign up for that. You have to hide it. So there's always like some smoke and mirrors.
I have heard that you, Sarah, feel like you rushed the book that you wrote. And the reason I ask about this is A, is that true? And B, because I teach this writing workshop, and these are a lot of people who are relatively fresh out, relative to me anyway, fresh out of whatever environment they grew up in, that they're, in recovery from, they immediately want to write a book. And they want to talk to me because I have written a book. The obvious elephant in the room there is it took me it's 40 years later. Mm. And so I would love to hear you talk about, because what I kind of want to say is like, hold your horses, right. Don't feel like the pressure to write a book. But I'm saying that from my perspective. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on it from your perspective.
The short answer is that my publisher, who was great and I loved and everything, but wanted the pub date to be around the time of Keith's sentencing so that it was like in the news cycle, which really gave me like, once the proposal was set and everything, and then we started writing like 3 months. It was a very short period of time. And I had a newborn. And I had a co-writer and she was great. But the back and forth and the stress of it all and the deadlines and then like the Zoom calls. And there was a lot of things about the literary world, which I don't like in terms of like pressure. And that just was too reminiscent for me at the time. And also like, you have to do... It was a Dateline or something, Nippy. Remember they really wanted me to do Dateline? I was like, I don't want to do Dateline. And then I got totally shamed from somebody.
No, I bailed. And I said, blame it on me. Because I can tell by people's questions where they're coming from. It reveals everything. I can understand if they know what they're looking at. I can understand also if they care what they're looking at. And I just got a hit. And I was like, you know what? I don't have to fucking do this. I'm not doing it. And I told Sarah, I was like, I'm not doing it. I don't like that. I was like, I have to draw boundaries in my personal life. It's what I'm learning to do. And I drew it.
The coercion to try to get us to do this. And also they wanted footage that we'd already given to the vow. The vow hadn't come out yet. We didn't know what the vow was going to be. But that was another thing, is like the vow was like, can you not give this to anybody else so that we can have it? And we were like, sure. But then Dateline, there was just so much pulling in ways that was like too reminiscent of what we'd just gotten out of, in addition to trying to write the book.
No care.
Right. And not understanding the empathy of you two, who are really processing so much, like outside of any kind of media, your life is just radically altered and you've lost all these people and you've lost all this structure. And to me, those are people who should be treated like people who just got out of a natural disaster.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted. That's really all I wanted. On a base level was empathy and care. And I just didn't feel like I was getting it from the people who were going to try and take care of our story.
In retrospect, if we had known what the vow was going to be, I would have just I would just said immediately no to everything else, because the vow really did do us a solid in terms of like actively showing the world what was good about it, what the vision was, like what, like I think they did a great job in that, like bringing people on the journey and giving us empathy as survivors. And like, I'm very grateful for that. So back to the question of the book, it was rushed. I probably had like 1 or 2 passes of the final edit. It was so intensely stressful. And to the point where I didn't even have time to read all the journals that I wanted to, like you did. I would have done it differently for sure. I'm glad it's out there. I feel like what's there, even though it's a good book, it's not like, it's just, it needs a couple of edits, you know, like there's just some things that were like, that's not quite right, but it's fine, you know, it's fine for explaining the chronology.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my takeaway from that, you know, as a broader piece of advice to people who are relatively freshly out of these environments and are thinking about writing a book is don't paint yourself into a corner. Like give yourself as much time as you need and let that be decades if it needs to be.
Yes.
Like if you must write about it, don't rush yourself because
don't rush.
Absolutely.
It's just unnecessary trauma, really, that you're like immediately feeling the pressure to kind of sell your story, either literally or figuratively. I want to say, like, take some time to think about who you want to be outside of this identity before you solidify it in the culture that this is who you are. Like really think about that, because it would take a lot, especially for people who want to be actors. It will take a lot for people to forget that. People tend to remember this shit. And the gnarlier your story is, the more they'll remember it. You know what I mean? So that's another thing that I really want to, moving forward, talk to people who are writers and wanting to write about it, is like, just for a minute, go macro with your whole life plan.
Yes.
And think about maybe doing other stuff and finding your way in the world, and then talking about it, because you'll be smarter about how you talk about it too, you know?
Yeah.
Well put.
I totally agree. And to recap, no deadlines. Like if you do sign with a publisher or whatever, like make sure you don't have a deadline.
Or make it that deadline be 2 years.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes, that's true. You probably need to have a deadline, but have a big gap. And take your time. I do think that writing things out chronologically is very cathartic for people. You should like, this happened. Like I hear that a lot in that some cult therapists, even if they're planning on writing or not, just to like map out what happened. Because often there's like, at least for me, there were huge gaps in my memory of like, what was I doing for 3 years? Like, where were we? What did we do? What was I don't remember. Because we were so high strung in performance mode, fill, build, go. Everything was intense. I mean, and it was like a different state. It's like trying to remember what you did when you were drunk. Like it's not accessible.
Right. Or what actually happened in a car accident.
Yeah.
You know, where like all of a sudden time slows, / you're not really sure who you were, / was that 3 hours or 3 seconds? You know, it's also kind of like you're in this place where your brain doesn't have time to process, right?
Yes.
And so it just becomes blank. Anyway, I want as many people to write about it, about their experience as possible, but I also don't want people to write half-assed books that turn it into a genre that people don't pay attention to or take seriously, you know?
That's a very good point. I will initiate a conversation between you and Daniela, and also Tia Levings, who is in a number of different fundamentalist Christian offshoots.
She's great.
She is featured in the docuseries that's out now called Shiny Happy People, about the Duggars and that whole Christian offshoot debacle. But where can people find you? What's the best way for them to connect with you if you like that?
I have a really low rent website. And by low rent, I mean, I'm still working on it, but social media, particularly Instagram, I'm very present on.
Right.
Also Twitter, but not as much. But Instagram, if you want to see videos of me and my dog opening a box of my books when they first got here, or you want to see me and my girlfriend goofing around. I mean, but also Instagram's the thing I pay attention to the most, and it's easy to message me there, and I definitely respond to that.
Great. I can't remember it, even though we just talked about it. Did you say you have or have not read my book?
It's actually right here. But I'm only at like page 40. I wish the Lalage Center was a real place. Can you imagine like a library that was really cult specific, and what a great resource that would be, and as a place to hang out? I got big dreams for the Lalage Center.
Oh, big dreams. Same here. And if I die, or I will die one day, but when I die, Nippy, can you donate my cult books to the Lalage Center? It's a morbid note to end on.
Jesus.
I will continue reading it because I am so curious to continue kind of the conversation about when and how we write our stories, and how to shepherd people through that in a way that isn't harmful.
Let's please do that episode in August, because I'd like to keep chatting with you. B, have you back. And I think that would be a really good resource for a lot of our listeners, our survivors, and ask about how to write a book. And we could put that episode out as like, here is a resource for you.
Yeah, that would be great. I have so much to say about it and continue to sort of gather information when I meet people and when I talk to survivors who are thinking about writing.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Apologize that we went for 2 hours, but I also loved every second of it.
So much to say.
Sorry, not sorry.
That was great. That was great.
Please come back soon. The conversation's not over and we're new friends now. So.
All right. Thanks to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Citizens of Sound, a podcast production agency committed to developing and launching shows with gravity and depth. From conception to launch, Citizens will partner with you every step of the way, whether you're an actor, business owner, doctor, fitness coach, hairstylist, or influencer. Connection is the future of communication. Jump on board with Citizens of Sound today and start your show. Go to citizensofsound.com and follow them on Instagram. And trust me, it'll be a really good decision for you. So every time I hear this story, and obviously Guinevere's highly intelligent, and it's not an intelligence thing, as we've established in our other podcasts and stories, I just can't get out of my mind that there needs to be some sort of curriculum for kids, something in schools to build awareness around what these abuses of power look like. You know what I mean? Like there's always someone that feels like is lurking. They look normal. And there needs to be something in place that where kids can recognize it early. I mean, this is a little different because she grew up and it was all she knew, but she's left with the aftermath of going and putting the pieces back together. But there needs to be something like, I
think that's for Amy Saltzman and How to Spot a Spider and all these people who are trying to educate children at a young age to see the red flags. The thing that really resonated with me the most after reading her book, which again, I really recommend, is that I love the idea of living communally. And so much of what she described at the beginning sounded great. And I saw a video of a podcast recording recently where someone was saying that like what makes you happy as you grow older and you've got kids is just to spend time with people you like and their kids and have families together. So she moved in with 20 people into a commune. I'm like, well, that sounds great, but how do you keep it from getting culty? So this obviously Mel Lyman was not able to prevent that, and some really terrible things occurred. And the conversation continues. So we thank Guinevere Turner for putting it all out there, for writing her essay, for writing her book, which she's now adapting into a film and working on a TV series about culty programmers. Great. And she has a dog named Marbles that she loves. And we'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Guinevere.
Thank you, Guinevere. Please keep in touch. We love you. Bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave. But I know
Hope you liked this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred. True story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.